I want to invite Sam Allen to the stage. He's our keynote speaker. Thank you very much for gracing this event, and I'll hand it over to you. Sam is CEO of Iterable, one of the largest companies in the space, and he's spent a whole bunch of time at Salesforce doing M&A and driving very many things, which he can.
Thank you. Using the word grace and Sam Allen in the same sentence, that may never have been uttered before, so I appreciate it. So am I using a clicker or am I manually doing this? Okay. So first of all, thanks everyone for coming. I don't know what the agenda said I was supposed to present, but a couple weeks ago I was talking with Arjun and we talked about the challenge of actually selling into enterprise. I said, why don't I talk about that? So that's what you're going to get today. Again, I'm Sam Allen. It's great to be here. And just on behalf of everybody coming today, thank you for taking the time. I know it means a lot to take time out of your day to come, and hopefully they'll have a great agenda to support that. I am the CEO of Iterable. I've been in this role for 3 months, so please go easy on me. I've been in the technology sector for over 25 years, and I'll talk about that here in a moment. So just a little bit about me. I'm from Kansas City, Missouri. Thank you. All right, shout out. That's pretty rare. I grew up very strong work ethic, very blue-collar home. My first job, I was 7 years old, chopping wood and selling on street corners so that people could heat their houses in the winter, and I've just never stopped working. So I'm just a deep believer in strong work ethic. When I was 18, I got admitted to the University of Missouri. I couldn't afford it, so I joined the United States Marine Corps. I spent the next 10 years in the Marines. I was lucky enough to also go back and get my degree. I spent 4 years enlisted, 6 years as an officer doing intelligence and counterterrorism missions, a couple combat deployments. So that was kind of my formative years. I came to Silicon Valley in 1997, just to give you a little bit of sense how old I am. And that's when the dot-com boom was going crazy, and we're hiring everybody that you could hire who had a pulse. I went to a really large Fortune 50 company that doesn't exist anymore because it was very poorly led. Jumped from there to a startup called Cerent. I was the first non-engineer hired. I was brought there to build a program management function. 18 months later, we were acquired by Cisco for $7.4 billion. So I've seen the ideation through exit as someone in the trenches. I stayed at Cisco for about 5 years. I did M&A. I ran an operations division. And then I got bored and really was kind of hitting the ceiling. And so I decided to get my MBA, so I went to Wharton for that. And then coming out of that, I founded a company called Scan Cafe, which was in the consumer media space. And then Habitat is on here because I believe in giving back, and I'm a board member of Habitat for Humanity. I also do some other philanthropic work on the side. And then I meandered my way into Salesforce. And I got to Salesforce in 2014. I built their M&A engine, did about 24 deals there. And then I ran a couple of divisions at the company as I built my career over the next 11 years. And my last role there was Executive Vice President, Chief Pipeline Officer. So I was responsible for driving $45 billion pipeline globally across every segment and cloud that Salesforce has. Okay, I think that context is a little important just to underpin some of the things I'm going to talk about. I've sold a lot into the enterprise. I have been sold to as an enterprise budget owner. And then somewhere throughout that entire journey, I got married, had 2 kids who are now both in college. So that's a little bit about me. Okay, so let's talk about the enterprise buyer. So you're actually looking at one right now. So I'm an enterprise buyer. I'm in my 50s. I generally have a big title, which comes with a big paycheck, and that used to mean a big ego. But to be honest with you, I'll tell you a dirty little secret about my peerage in these large companies. They're kind of scared right now. And they realize that AI is completely unlocking lots of value, or is making senior executives think, why am I paying these people all this money to manage these huge teams? And so what they're looking for is security. There's a famous saying, no one's ever been fired for buying Microsoft, or no one's ever been fired for buying Salesforce. And that's very true. So that's going to be a theme of what I'm going to talk about over the next about 10 minutes. So I'm going to present for about 10, and I'll be happy to take some Q&A if anybody has it. So one of my roles at Salesforce, I ran the MarTech stack. So believe it or not, at that point, Salesforce had about 100 vendors in its MarTech stack, spending over $100 million a year. I managed that entire budget. I saw a lot of pilots. And a lot of them were excellent. But I'm going to tell you that the startup graveyard is filled with a lot of companies that had great pilots but could not get to execution through the pilot program. And here's why. Enterprise buyers don't buy technology. They buy certainty. And that's a really key thing to understand as you think about deploying your technology in the enterprise. The AI gold rush has created a lot of excitement, without doubt. It's also created a lot of fear and, frankly, a lot of buyer fatigue. Because I talked to a CMO at a public company a couple of weeks ago. She's actually on my board, and she said every week she gets pitched a new agent, a new AI bot, everything, and it's just, she doesn't know what to do, right? So that exhaustion is real. You've got to figure out how to punch through that. So the market's very noisy. Everyone's talking about AI, about enterprise buyers are very skeptical. This chart is the number of S&P 500 earnings calls that mention AI, and you can see the spike there. I'm surprised it's not bigger than that. I bet that'll go through the roof here as we continue to progress. But what do enterprise buyers really, really want? As I said earlier, they're buying confidence and capability. They want proof, they want predictability, and they want partnership. Risk avoidance in the enterprise will trump innovation FOMO. I can't underscore that enough. So what you need, of course, is a champion, and you should be selling to champions in these enterprises. And a champion's a mid-level executive. They're passionate about technology. All the practitioners of that technology most likely report up to that champion. But here's the thing, that champion doesn't write checks, okay? So, and they don't buy alone. And what you need to do is sell to the people above the champion who actually sponsor large transformative technology in the enterprise. So now you enter the real decision maker. The real decision maker is the CFO, who's got to balance a budget. It's the CIO, who has to think about integration of a very complex marketing technology stack. It's the chief legal officer, who's got to think about things like compliance, especially anything related to AI. So there's a lot that you have to go unpack in the enterprise from a buying cycle perspective. So how do you bridge all these different decision makers? The first thing that you need to do is build trust. And the best way to build trust is to be fluent in their language. And there's lots of different types of language in the enterprise. I kind of picked three for this conversation. The first is the visionary language, and this is how you speak to your champion. These are people that care about transformation, innovation, and competitive advantage. But you also need to speak the risk language for the legal and security team. What is compliance? What's SOC 2? What's GDPR? What's PII? Data residency? Audit trails. This stuff is boring, but it's important, and you won't make it past pilot if you can't address these things from a risk perspective. And of course, you have the money language. So the finance folks, what's the ROI? What's the payback period? What's the total cost of ownership? Understanding all of that context is hypercritical when you're trying to sell into the enterprise. And most AI companies, most technology companies, most startups speak the first language very, very well. If they're buried in it, they're passionate about it, and they know it. But where they fall down is in speaking to a CIO or a CFO, or even a chief legal officer. Just a sidebar comment on that. Chief legal officers are now a much more important component of the buying cycle than ever because of the obvious privacy and risk issues related to AI technologies. So your content, your demo, your pitch decks, your first call decks, they all need to be multilingual, okay? Think about that as you're constructing those. Then once you've built trust, here's the one really important thing to understand. You aren't selling a standalone technology. The first question you might get asked is, how does this integrate with Salesforce? Or fill in the blank, right? So cutting edge AI has got to integrate with a 25-year-old CRM platform. It just has to. So think about when you're allocating engineering resources, how are you going to make that happen? And the enterprise isn't a greenfield. It's a jungle of legacy systems that honestly, many of them are politically protected by somebody's career. So as you're thinking about how to get into an account, understand what the incentives are around these other technologies that you might be trying to replace. And so your technology doesn't live in isolation. It lives with SAP and Databricks and ServiceNow and so on. And I was constructing this slide last night. I thought about something. People in here know what a mainframe is? So it's technology from the 60s. This year, there's going to be $5 billion of mainframe sales. And that's going to grow to $7 billion over the next 3 years. Mainframes. Okay, so understand that there is a morass of technologies out there that you got to deal and manage with. It's just endless. Okay, so congratulations, you get into the pilot phase. But remember one really important thing during the pilot. Yes, they are looking at your technology, but they're also trying to understand change management complexity. So what I mean by that is the gap between, hey, this is great technology and it works really well, between that and how do I deploy this to 50,000 employees across 30 different countries, that's a massive gap. You can't expect them to get there on their own. And so you got to think about how you're going to help them on that journey to go from pilot to full deployment. That's an area where a lot of startups fall down when they try to penetrate the enterprise. It's an enormous gap. And while you're in your pilot, remember this, and if there's one thing I would love everyone to take away from my conversation, it's this: time kills deals, okay? And there's a different sense of urgency. Your startup might have 18 months of cash runway, and you're dealing with an enterprise that has a buying cycle that's longer than that. And this is why the enterprise can really kill deals. I mean, you want a deal now, and for FY26, they're planning their FY26 budget in Q3 of FY25, and they have a nine-month procurement cycle. So just understand how the buying cycle works at the enterprise is really critical. Procurement team, and Arjun made a comment about the number of people at Adobe and demand gen. Their procurement team at a large enterprise may have more people than your entire company combined. And so understanding that, I have a quote here. I talked to a sales rep the other day. He said in one Fortune 100 deal, 14 different people had veto power, and 2 people had titles he'd never heard of. And so just understanding the complexity of how you have to get technology adopted is really critical. And then to that point, enterprise buyers aren't buying the pilot you show them today. They're trying to invest in something for the next 5 years. So understanding that is really critical. Bless you. So they need to know things like 24/7 support. What are the service level agreements that you're going to put in place? What happens when the site goes down at 2 o'clock in the morning? The AI adds a special element of fear. What happens if your model hallucinates and I get sued for $50 million, right? You have to understand these things and talk about them during the pilot and buying cycle. And these concerns all seem really boring, but let me tell you something. The enterprise is a boring place, and you've got to understand these things and kind of get in front of them. Okay, so just a couple other data points around continuing to signal trust. So references are actually really important. Every industry you're going to sell to believes that they're super unique, even though most of them are not, but they need proof that you understand their world. Selling to a financial services company CIO is completely different than selling to a health life sciences company CIO. And if you don't speak their language and understand what they're dealing with, they're going to just kick you out of the room, right? So understand that's really important. And recognize you've got this cold start problem. You need enterprise references, but you don't have an enterprise account yet. And so you got to really do everything you can to get that first enterprise account, because when you do, it's going to be worth 10x minimum in future deal flow. So do whatever you got to do to get that first enterprise account. There's a counterintuition about how to sell into the enterprise around pricing. These enterprises have huge budgets, and they're not afraid to spend it. They just want to be secure that they're making the right decision. And so they're not buying software, they're buying a strategic initiative that requires executive support. So a $50,000 tool is something that a manager will bring to their vice president, but a $500,000 platform transformation gets C-suite engagement and sponsorship, and then protection. And so price to the value that you're going to create for the enterprise. Don't price based on some analysis you do with cost of goods sold. Okay, I think a lot of you probably understand that, but I thought it was a really important point to bring up. Don't be afraid to ask for a big number. Okay, so this is my last presentation slide. So what do you do to get into the enterprise? Enterprise selling is won through preparation, patience, and process, not flash. The second thing is enterprise selling is a lot of orchestration. It's not persuasion. You got to really map the organization. Think about that example where I said there's 14 different people with veto power. Where do they sit in the org? How do you align to them? Look at your LinkedIn profile. How are your investors connected to this company? You've got to create that human connection. That's really, really critical in the enterprise. Your job is to make buying from you the safest decision they can make. So you've got to really address all these trust issues. Address their fears with ROI calculators, executive briefing decks, competitive analysis. If you can get a Gartner report or Forrester report to support your position, that's great. Because again, a CIO will love to be able to point to that and say, well, it's a great technology because Gartner says it is. I personally think that's an antiquated way that we go about things in the enterprise, but frankly, it's the price of doing business today, so kind of understand that. And then equip your champion. Like, you need your champion to be selling for you when you're not in the room. That's super, super important. And make sure you're there 100% available to that person and make them your best salesperson. And then you're selling a business case, not a feature set. Translate your features and the metrics really early. Cost per ticket, time to insert, time to insight, churn, all that kind of stuff. So be very specific and pointed about what that's going to do for that enterprise. And then for your first customer, I mentioned this a moment ago, pick one vertical say it's going to be financial services, find an account that you think could benefit from your technology and do everything you can to align all the wood behind that one arrow and go get that account. Even if it means giving you unpreferential pricing, just get it done. Consider it a cost of doing business, and then leverage the hell out of that logo very ruthlessly as you build pipeline in the enterprise. And then the last thing is, remember, enterprise buyers are paid to minimize risk, not maximize innovation. And your job is to make buying from you the safest decision that they can make. Okay, so those are my multiple points on what to actually do. Each one of these things is a kind of fully threaded thing. And then the last thing is thank you. I put these pictures in here. I did a 4-day trip to Toronto when I was running Tableau and closed $10 million in deals in those 4 days. That took 6 months of work. So I was just there to polish those deals off. And we sold a couple of big banks and TELUS, a huge telecom company. That took a lot of work and a lot of energy and a lot of team and a lot of, Warriors games and you name it. They didn't buy the technology because the technology spoke for itself. They bought it because all the energy, orchestration, time, and investment we put into those decision makers. I'm kind of tongue-in-cheek. I blackbarred these two people simply because they didn't know I was presenting this today, but I don't think they would mind. Anyway, okay, so that's my presentation on how to penetrate the enterprise. Do people have questions? If anybody has a question, I'd love to take it.
Any questions?
Yeah, there's one right here in the front.
We'd love to hear more about the marketer's role in this and how they can best support the enterprise sale.
Yeah, let me break that in two spots. So from a product marketing perspective, I think it's hypercritical that the product marketer has a very strong position in your company because they need to really translate the technological value into how a company will adopt that technology and drive it at scale. So the PMM component in marketing is hypercritical. I think the other one is, I talked a lot about building relationships and orchestration and all that. The whole event idea and building bespoke closing dinners, and I was kind of tongue-in-cheek when I said going to Warriors games, but it's actually true, right? Getting customers or prospects to events like that or Michelin chef dinners, those things dramatically accelerate a deal. And so for me in marketing, it's the PMM stuff, which is kind of obvious, but it's also the pipe building. But to me, I think a lot of marketers bring tremendous value in maturing the pipe. And often we get into conversations about leads and pipeline creation, and those things are all valid to talk about. We don't spend enough time talking about how marketing helps mature pipeline. And so that's really, really critical. And then just another angle from the buying side, CMOs are getting a more and more elevated position because of the complexity of these technologies. And so in the buying cycle, they're taking a larger step forward. And so when I talked about mapping accounts, like your marketing team needs to build relationships with the acquiring CMO marketing team. And so that's a really important nuance that traditionally hasn't been as to the forefront as it is today. Did that answer your question? Okay, great. I think there was another one in the back somewhere.
I have a question about customer references. I work in customer marketing, and I'm
Yeah.
curious if you still think case studies and testimonials are relevant as
Yeah.
AI kind of changes things. Do enterprise buyers believe those ROI stats they read on them? What do you think?
That's a great question. I probably am remiss of not putting that in my deck. And so customer testimonials are super critical. So if you think about my commentary around buyers are really trying to buy safety and job protection, the two things they can point to is like they can say, oh, Gartner says this is a phenomenal technology and companies A, B, C, and D have acquired it. And so getting those customers, if you can get them to publicly talk about their investment, that's phenomenal, and you put it on a billboard and put it in all your marketing materials. But even from a back channel reference check, I have customers in my past who've said, look, we can't give you the right to go out and market us, but here's my phone number, have any prospect call me. And so customer marketing is something that's, I think, absolutely critical in the enterprise because enterprise buyers, again, they're trying to reduce risk. And if they can point to a bunch of other people who have acquired the technology, that's going to help. And that kind of is what underpins the comment, you don't get fired for buying Salesforce because 500 of the Fortune 500 use it, right? So I think customer marketing is absolutely critical. I should have put that in my presentation, so thank you for asking that. I think there's another one further in the back. Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, my name's Levi, former Marine as well.
Semper Fi.
Semper Fi. I wanted to talk about have your champions sell for you. I'm in a unique position where I am in an enterprise company, right? So people are selling to me, but I also am in marketing, so I'm trying to sell out to other enterprise. And I wanted to kind of talk about that, have your champion sell for you, because it's super important, but what motivates the champion is kind of the critical component to that, right? Which is, for me, it's like if a company comes to me and says, hey, I want you to be part of what we're building, and when we have a partnership and a pilot, your feedback actually adjusts how we go to market, that is an extremely engaging way to approach a champion versus like, hey, I want you to sell our vision to your company. That's a component of it, but it's not the whole engagement cycle that you need a champion to kind of follow through with. So my question is, have you seen things like that before? And like, what is the future of a champion inside of an enterprise organization, and how does that role evolve
Yeah.
in the future?
Okay, so I don't foresee a world where you're not going to need champions first and foremost, because they just are so critical in keeping the drumbeat going from a prioritization perspective inside your target prospect. I alluded a little bit to this, but I didn't dig into it enough. One thing that your champion is motivated by is they are motivated by career progression. And so if you go and sell this amazing technology to the senior director of sales operations, and they can make this technology get adopted broadly across 12,000 sales reps, and you gain 4% productivity, which equates to a couple $100 million, they can point to that. That's going to accelerate their career growth. And so when you think about your champions, you want to arm them with, hey, they love the technology, but recognize that a reason they love it is it's going to compel them from a career growth perspective. And so I think that's a really important component of how you take them on. But more specifically to your question, I don't see a world where they aren't important. Frankly, as teams get trimmer and companies continue to what they call reshape, or what most of us call a riff, there's less people in the practitioner level. They don't riff enough executives, by the way, that's just my opinion, but they riff a lot of practitioners. And so your champions become even a more important component of your selling cycle. I'm not sure if I 100% answered your question, but that's the way I'm thinking about it. And 250th birthday on Monday. Don't forget that. Hurrah. Okay, any other questions? Yeah, way in the back.
Yeah, thanks for the chat today. I'm on the post-sales side, and I wanted to get your take on post-sales change management and how, say, at Iterable, if you're buying technology, how do you guide your teams into adopting it? Or if you're even looking at new technology, how soon in the sales cycle are you bringing up change management?
Yeah, so post-sales implementation, I think you're talking about adoption. So the very first thing is someone has to own it. And often the champion who championed the acquisition is the practitioner. They're not going to own the implementation inside the company. And so if you're on the buying team, you got to identify who owns this technology, because I can tell you from all my years at Salesforce and before that at Cisco, there's a lot of dead capacity that is sold out there. You know, people oversell seat licenses, they oversell utilization, and then a customer the following year when they're up for renewal, they're like, man, we only used 70% of what you sold us, so we're going to downgrade, right? And so I think it's really critical that you focus on what that adoption is, but it's got to have an owner, like someone inside the company who's got power in the company needs to own the implementation of that technology. Otherwise, it's going to wither, because there are so many technologies out there. So I got to Iterable 2 months ago, and I'm like, what's our kind of go-to AI tool? Well, we have Gemini. I'm like, I don't like Gemini. I like ChatGPT. You know, so can I use ChatGPT? Well, yeah, but you can't put company data into it. And I do go out and start talking to people, and it's like Anthropic and Grok. Everybody's using their tool of choice. And so as a CEO, I'm looking at this. I'm like, what are we spending on Gemini? Because my company employees aren't using it. And so that's a problem, because I want to be more capital efficient. And so, we didn't have an owner who owned the adoption decision and then created the use cases inside the company that then compelled people to use the technology. And so arming whoever the adoption people are with those use cases and how your company should be deploying this technology, and then continuing to drumbeat follow-up is really important. And I think a lot of startups don't invest enough in customer success. That's one of the things Benioff did on day one when he built Salesforce, and it was a big reason why that company was so successful. You have to have people invested in the success of the customer you sell the product to. And one of the things I'm evolving Iterable is out of a transactional environment into much more of a customer-obsessed minded strategic advisor, as opposed to just, yeah, come buy my software, write me a check, and I'll go on to my next deal. So I'm not sure, did I answer your question? Okay, great. We got one
Sorry.
way. Go ahead, yeah.
Hi, I'm Tuba. I'm the founder and CEO of Amoeba AI. We're one of the younger companies selling into enterprises. So what you're saying about CISOs like really resonated with me. The one question I have is buying and selling in enterprises feels very cultish in general. How many of your decisions are dependent on, well, my friend used it, versus like on actually evaluating platforms?
Yeah. Okay, so a couple of things there. Human relationships actually still matter. And I can't tell you the customer, but we're in a buying cycle right now, and we're going against a competitor. It's a great competitor. They're a strong company, and it's kind of neck and neck. Well, one of my board members is friends with the CEO. And so I pinged him this morning, said, hey, can you send this to the CEO or introduce me and I'll do it. And then that CEO immediately wrote back and said, well, who's the champion inside the company? I'll go talk to him. So your technology needs to work. You need to understand the customer problem. You need to deploy a solution for the customer problem, but you might lose because you aren't as deeply connected to that enterprise as your competitor. And I don't know, how many people, show of hands, think Salesforce is a great technology? Okay. So if you're watching online, it was very limited. But look, it's a great, phenomenal company. I loved my time there. It was great, but it's going to be a kind of crickety technology, right? They're still selling billions upon billions upon billions of dollars of it. Because at the end of the day, they have senior executives who have great relationships with the buyers. And this is why you see technologies get acquired and you're just scratching your head and you're like, that is a bad technology. Why are they buying it? Because there's some sort of connection at the top. And I talked earlier in my presentation about never underestimate how politically motivated someone is around a buying decision that was made 3, 4, 5 years ago because their career is tied to it. And so a really critical step, I talked about mapping the organization, like spend time to understand who the people in the buying cycle are and how you're connected to them, how your board is connected to them, how your friends are connected to them. Because at worst case, you can reach out and get some inside information on, hey, yeah, the pilot's going okay, but I'm hearing that you guys are falling down on X, Y, or Z. So don't be afraid to leverage that power of your network. It's really, really critical. It's a great question.
Hey, Sam, thanks
Hi.
for the great presentation. Having sold to enterprises for 10 years, I could see the journey. For somebody who's starting an AI native company, what are some of the tools out there? I know Arjun put a whole stack of tools. Could you give us some guidance on what's working today? What's experimental? Maybe even give a plug for Iterable here
Yeah.
in the audience.
Well, I didn't want to stand up here and shill for my company, but yeah, it's a good one. But so first of all, I'm probably one of the least qualified people in this room to talk about the best AI tools, to be very blunt with you, because I'm moving so fast and so buried in my new job that I'm not spending enough time on that. But I'll answer that in a couple different ways. First and foremost, what I've told my company is, I don't care what your job is, you have to become a native practitioner of AI, right? Like if you're spending hours and you're in marketing trying to come up with a great tagline and you're not leveraging your tool of choice, that's a mistake. I did this big shift in our go-to-market strategy my second or third week at the company, and then our CRO said, well, we need a project plan for this. I said, okay. So I went to ChatGPT and I wrote a prompt and I got a project, and 4 minutes later, I sent it to him. Here's your project plan, right? I didn't need a project manager. I didn't need somebody to go create this for me. I just did it on my own. And so I think becoming AI practitioners is the first important thing. It's become more agnostic about what the tool is. From an engineering perspective, and this is where my knowledge starts to really erode, but what you're able to do in engineering with tools like Cursor is pretty phenomenal. And so I think as a CEO, part of my job is capital allocation. And I need to drive more engineering capacity in my organization. But what I'm telling my CTO is, you need to get me 30% gain, and I'm not going to give you an extra dime. Because the tools are out there, go figure it out. And so to me, it's less about what are the specific tools and more about what culture are you creating inside your company to go drive. So I didn't give you the great answer, but that's how I'm thinking about it. We got time for one more?
You one more.
Front row here.
So I think people buy, what you started the discussion with, is a lot of CYA. So peer pressure, lemmings off a cliff. That explains a lot of the cultish type of decision making. And then your last point about the importance of AI, and there's a contradiction because you said a lot of enterprises don't want to use ChatGPT because of privacy. So how important is privatizing and getting your own AI within the enterprise versus staying up late and having ChatGPT write your proprietary plan?
So I think once you get inside the network, and I air quote that, and you start sitting on top of people's data, that's where the real fear comes in. And one thing Salesforce has done really well is, they've got their data cloud product and they're trying to stitch everything in there, and then investing a lot in things like MCP and RAG. And that's what we're doing at Iterable, because you want to basically create a world where you're going to your prospects and saying, our AI engine is not going out to Reddit and getting information. It is actually on top of your own data stack, and it's walled in that way, and it's secure. And here's all the reasons why we believe it's secure, and here's all the compliance components. But our AI works best on top of your data. And I think selling that story and pitching it that way is the right way to do it. A lot of the fear is around hallucinations, and they see these stories about what these AI tools do and weird stuff, people's brands and everything else. But that's because these LLMs are out kind of just going out to Wikipedia and, all these other kind of open source sites. And so if you can actually convince them that you're building your AI technology on top of their data and building a walled garden around it, that will alleviate a lot of the CYA and a lot of the concern. I've seen that work well. Okay. I'm getting the hook?
Yeah.
All
Thank
right.
you. Thank
All
you
right.
for
Thanks,
such an,
everybody. Really appreciate it.
empathetic and transparent talk. Thank you. Give Sam a big hand, please. Thank you very much. If you have a team and you want the team to be 10x what they are, you've got to send them to events. The best event to send them is AI Marketing Summit.